All right. Well, Lucian, thank you very much for taking the time. The most interesting thing I thought when I heard about the things you were talking about is basically something that kind of doesn't make sense. It's like right-wing activism, right? Because at least when I hear about activism, it has a connotation of things that people on the left usually do, because you see protests, you see marches, and they usually have a left-wing agenda. And the marches that have a right-wing agenda are usually not as don't have as many people attending. So maybe tell me a bit about how you would define this. Like, what's the difference? It's is it something that has historically been more of a thing people on the left do, or what the context of activism actually is?
Right. So first of all, thank you for having me. So what you described is just one facet of activism. I mean, activism has been a thing, at least in the Western world, since the 16th or 17th century. And for the vast majority of this history of activism, activism itself was not a left-wing phenomenon or an exclusively right-wing phenomenon. It was a neutral term to describe someone who is active in a political project or even a political movement, wanting to change a policy or abolish a policy. Was a neutral term. However, you're correct that in the last 40 years or so, when you describe someone as an activist, it kind of sort of implies that that person is a left-winger, or that person is, at the very least, a collectivist in some way, shape, or form. And that is because activism has come to be confused with protests and marches and picketing and whatnot. But that's not the only form of activism. Activism also implies lobbying, which is rarely seen in the press. Activism also implies subversion. Activism implies forms of agitprop that are not particularly public. Usually the protests come at the end of a political project. That is, provided that the political project has been rightly implemented, so to speak. So in the sense that it can be successful. And the reason why you see many, although this is not an absolute rule, I mean, for instance, the March for Life in the United States is usually the biggest protest in the country. So it's not a rule that right-wing protests get fewer people. No, not necessarily. But the reason why you get this impression is, first of all, because the media tends to lie. I mean, when was the last time you saw on CNN an aerial footage on how many people are on the March for Life? That happened last time about 20 years ago. They just don't do it. But on the other hand, many right-wing individuals and right-wing organizations don't understand that you don't need to go on the streets to win the narrative. In fact, you don't go to the streets until after you won the narrative. And there are several historical examples for that. For instance, the movement or the political project to abolish segregation in the United States. All of those protests came at the end of the narrative dispute. And when the anti-segregationist side won the narrative, that's when they went into the streets. And then they made very good enough theatrics with the help of the stupid police, which amplified their theatrics. And as a result, the entire or significant portion of the population agreed with their agenda, even though in reality, most of the population had already agreed with their agenda a few years back when they had won the narrative. So activism does not just mean picketing and going into the streets and whatnot. Activism also means agitation. Activism also means, and dare I say, propaganda. I mean, spreading ideas, convincing new people, going door to door to sell new ideas. All of this is activism, and it doesn't have to be necessarily public in the sense that the newspapers write about it, or you get to see on it on TV or on YouTube. For instance, what people do when they go to troll university events. That's also activism, and that's usually done with one or two people, or maybe three. Or when a right-wing group in a university invites a particular speaker, that's activism. The lecture that I had yesterday at the University of Ljubljana was essentially a form of activism. And none of these things necessarily have to appear in the media, and even though they're not massive, that doesn't mean they're not effective. It doesn't mean they don't help to change the narrative. Or
because maybe I was talking in the context of Slovenia, because here, at least at least here, it's my impression that it is more of a thing that the left does. But yeah, you're right. It does make sense because like the recent marches against, or actually for, gun control in the U.S. I think that a lot of it was building up way before, with the Sandy Hook incident and all of these things that kind of led up to this kind of the last explosion that was the shooting at
in Florida.
In Florida, it does seem that it takes a lot of time before these things get so big, like the Women's March as well. I think the narrative that the radical feminists were pushing, it took time. I remember talking to a fellow libertarian quite some time ago about these things, about feminism and how like men's rights are treated or not treated, and he was asking me like, where do you see these things? Are these really a problem? Do you really think this will blow out of proportion? There's no way. And you can see today how this has, this long thing has manifested now. But I think you do have the reaction, the counter response to all of these things, and this is why maybe now I'm hearing for the first time activism being framed in a right-wing context, at least for me, because this is something that I personally I don't see myself going out marching. This is like, I don't know why, and
sounds like a plebeian thing to do.
Yeah, it sounds like why would I complain in such an inefficient way? Like, what do I achieve with this? It makes really no sense for me personally to attend these things. Maybe or maybe I'm making a mistake. I don't know. So it's it's a very interesting thing that you said, that this is a thing that happens at the end of a process. So does this mean that like the process here is missing?
No, it's not missing, but think about it this way. Andrew Breitbart said politics is downstream from culture, which is absolutely true. But upstream from culture, there is a narrative, and upstream from the narrative, there is subversion. So in this country, for instance, the process for right-wing activists is somewhere between subversion and narrative. Basically, many more and more right-wingers, many more individuals, or not necessarily right-wingers, we could even say non-leftists, have become activated through various incidents, such as the Gamergate incident, which affected the whole planet. I mean, I said at the end of the Gamergate scandal on my channel that the left doesn't even begin to understand what a monster they created. Monster, of course, in scare quotes, because, in fact, I am a good friend of the monster, and I love being the monster. And it will be a monster that is going to be a huge force for good in the next 2 or 3 decades, all over Europe and all over North America and beyond, such as South America. South America, for instance, has gotten a few million new non-leftists, especially in Brazil, and they might actually tilt the election decisively towards the less marks, more misses message, which is going to be fantastic. It's going to be glorious. And if it's not going to happen this year, it's going to happen 5 years from now for sure.
Yeah, they fucked with the wrong people with Gamergate.
Yeah, not just gamers.
Yeah.
I mean, gamers are not a particularly big group, but there are the kind of group that can form the absolutely necessary 10% radical minority.
They are a loud group.
Not
opinionated
not
well.
Not necessarily loud. They're not even loud either, but they're bloody efficient because they're people that are patient. They're people when you tell them, look, we're gonna need to work 5 years until we can accomplish this. Most experienced gamers were like, okay, .gpg. Let's.
I was grinding at World of Warcraft for years, so no problem. Yeah, I can wait 5 years. Like that.
Yeah. So as a result, what happens in this country is now finally people are starting to learn about subversion and narratives, and in the next 3 or 4 years, the struggle in this country will be to win the narrative And then after you win the narrative, you start influencing the culture. And only after you start influencing the culture, only then you start considering things like protests, picketing, creating political parties, getting in officially into power, and things of that nature. Because I've heard from several non-leftists that I've had the pleasure and the privilege to meet while being in Slovenia. They're like, oh, maybe we should form a political party. And I'm like, no, it's way too early. Political parties legitimately on the non-left or libertarians or right-wing or whatever we want to call this collection of individuals who are sick and tired of communism, essentially. Political parties will have to come at the end. If we're lucky, maybe in 2024 or even 2028. Until then, we need to win the narrative, then start influencing the culture, take over several aspects of the culture. We're not going to be able to win the entire culture within 8 years, for sure. This usually takes 50 years. But we can win portions of the culture, for sure. Radio stations, even if it's only a small one, that's already a win. Because at the moment, the left dominates everything. And we only need 10%. If you have 10% radicals, a 10% militant minority, that's already enough to win the debate. And once you start making a dent into the narrative and into the culture, then you create a political party and the movement in the more classical sense that you go picketing and whatnot, because then you will have enough people because most people are followers. And at that moment, when you've already made a dent into the culture, that's when you'll have enough people willing to go out in the streets. And at that moment in time, then it won't matter how many people were the core demographics. It will roll on into a more massive protest. And by massive, I mean sometimes a 10,000 people protest is enough to change entire civilizations. I mean, just saying. I was explaining to the people yesterday in university. Fidel Castro won Cuba with 55 people. So, and this is especially true in smaller countries.
55 people.
Mm-hmm.
He changed the whole system with 55 people.
Yes.
How? How did he do that?
Well, of course they did it. They had those 55 people were all true believers in the revolutionary project, in revolutionary communism, and of course, the history remembers only the last part when Castro and his army seized the power militarily or by force, whatever, and removed Batista and whatnot. But nobody wants to research what happened before that. The several years in which the revolutionaries worked to subvert the culture and whatnot. And history records that, look, the revolutionary project, the revolutionary communist project of Fidel Castro did not have the majority of the population on its side. That's true. But it had 5 to 7%, which is usually enough. When you have 5% of the population agreeing with you, you win the debate 60 to 70% of the time. If you have 7% on your side, your chances increase to 80%. When you have 10%, you're going to win every single time. Another example, the Islamic Revolution in Iran. Even today, about 15% of the population of Iran is Muslim. The vast majority of the population is either pagan or Zoroastrian or Christian indeed, although there are a few Christians in Iran. But the actual Muslims, there are not so many of them. And at the time of the revolution in 1979, they had no more than 8% of the population. But that 8% minority was determined to win, whereas the vast majority either didn't care or ignored or wasn't militant enough, and that's how it happened. Of course, these days it's not going to happen like that. But in the past, there was also the habit of having the support of a foreign power. Although, again, Ayatollah Khomeini didn't have much of a support. I mean, yeah, sure, he had some Soviet support, but nowhere near as much as people imagine. The reason the Islamic Revolution was able to win is precisely because as many Muslims that they had, most of them were very militant and stubborn, because the most intolerant wins, not the most moderate. The moderates always lose.
So I don't want to go full Kathy Newman on you, but so what you're saying is that what you need 5 to 10% of a population that is radical enough to change the whole country, the system, the culture. That's all you need.
Especially the political system. Yes, the whole culture takes a lot longer, but with 10%, it's doable. Let me give you an example. Let's say, for instance, male genital mutilation. Now, the most sensible policy on that would be, look, we should ban it for individuals under the age of sexual consent. I don't know which is in the, probably 15 or 16 in this country, something like that, right? Okay, that's a sensible policy. But if you go with that policy in public, you're going to have to compromise with the idiots who think that all children deserve to be mutilated. So what a much more efficient option is to form a 5 to 10% radical minority that comes with the starting position of, no, every circumcision is haram and every perpetrator needs to be helicoptered. And once you go with that position, then everyone else needs to negotiate with you. And if you have 10% radicals, they have to negotiate with you. And any compromise that you obtain, it's already in your territory.
So the art of the deal.
No, it's not the art of the deal. It's a tactic called moving the middle, first applied successfully by animal rights activists in the 60s. It's a leftist tactic, but it works the other way around too, which is why the left is afraid, because they have also learned that there are enough right-wingers who have learned the book and now applying it to them. It's a leftist tactic, but it works.
So you talk a lot about like subversion, and that sounds like some Yuri Bezmenov KGB shit.
Mm-hmm.
But again, you are using it in a context of pushing forward and achieving like conservative or libertarian or whatever you want to call it goals. How are these tactics? You're saying they are what, like universal?
Yes. Basically, these are tools. They're not immoral tools. They're not moral tools. They're amoral tools. And just like a knife, you can use it to kill people or to cut a loaf of bread. The same thing is with agitation and subversion and all the other tools. They're essentially an amoral tool. What makes it moral or immoral is the goals pursued using that tool. And again, many of these methods, even in and of themselves, admittedly, the Soviet KGB apparatus perfected them or made them better, but they were around even before the Soviet Union. I mean, the very word propaganda originates from the Vatican. I mean, these things are not something new. It's just the latest reincarnation of them originates largely from the left. And instead of wasting time of trying to argue definitions or maybe find new words so they don't sound leftist or KGBist or whatnot, I'm like, okay, fine, you can have the name, I'll have the tools, thank you very much. And I'm not afraid to say subversion in public, because that is exactly what many people associated somehow with this operation have been doing and will do it a lot more often in the future. For instance, there are individuals who nobody suspects to be conservatives who work in leftist magazines. That's how many of us have been able to predict and know in advance what the left will do and have the propaganda material prepared already. That's why the left has started to lose on the narrative or the. First of all, it's the meme of the left can't meme, and usually my completion is because the left is the meme, and that was possible precisely because there were individuals who were basically giving everyone a heads up about what was going to happen, and most of the propaganda was already prepared before the event even took place. So that's why, and this is just the beginning. It will get a lot more complicated for the left. They know that they don't have a future. And to make things even worse for the left, and of course I'm not sorry for them, they haven't been able to produce new thinkers and new practical politics people. I mean, who is the Ben Shapiro of the left? Who is a David Rubin of the left? Who is, it was David Rubin, but David Rubin defected. And if you look even further down down in history, over the last 70 years, it had been a consistent trend of very intelligent leftists defecting to the right, starting with Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan spent most of his life as a Democrat, as a leftist. And then he learned economics, and he learned that the Soviet Union is dangerous, and slowly but consistently he changed. P.J. O'Rourke, he was a bomb-throwing leftist. And then suddenly he started traveling, and slowly but consistently he started realizing that, well, actually things aren't that bad in America. And if anything, those conservatives have a point, and my people need to be helicoptered. Same thing happened with Christopher Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens spent most of his life as a militant Trotskyist. And towards his end of his life was not just, people have smeared him as a neocon, as if that's a bad thing. But he wasn't just a neocon. He was a pro-lifer. He was an anti-feminist. But he started to understand economics towards the end of his life. I was a socialist once, then I learned economics. That was pretty much Christopher Hitchens. And throughout most of their lives, he was in conflict with his brother Peter Hitchens, who is an old school Tory.
Yeah.
But towards the end of their life, they were sounding more and more like the same. And now when I read Peter Hitchens's the columns on the Daily Mail, I'm like, yeah, this is how Christopher would have sounded had he still been alive. And this trend has only accelerated lately. A lot of known figures on the left have moved on the right, including practical politics people such as David Horowitz. The reason David Horowitz's operations are so successful is precisely because he learned them from the best, from the subverters paid by the Soviet Union to subvert the United States to become a leftist place. He was a militant in the American Communist Party. He was from a family of communists. He spent his entire childhood and early adulthood only amongst militant communists. And then when he was in his 50s, I think, or late 40s anyway, he started learning economics and he started traveling. He was like, hold on a second. No, the Reagan is right. It's my people that are wrong. And nowadays he has the Horowitz Freedom Center, which is by far the most successful right-wing activist organization. Nowadays, there's even younger people who do this. Turning Point USA, for instance, it's an organization entirely of young people who do exactly what needs to be done. Agitprop, activism, direct action. Of course, their methods may look different to the eyes of the public precisely because they're not Antifas, basically. But their effectiveness is similar or even better and superior to the left.
So what you're saying is that McCarthy did nothing wrong.
Oh, McCarthy definitely did nothing wrong. I'm serious about this. McCarthy did absolutely nothing wrong. The only thing he was wrong about was being too modest. McCarthy estimated that there are about 500 communists infiltrated at the top levels of the U.S. government. He was wrong. There were about 5,000 communists infiltrated in the top levels of the United States government.
Is this known, or is this like...
It's absolutely known. It's it's from the declassified archives of the KGB.
KGB archives.
Yes.
But would you say that, the shifts that you describe in people's ideology, would you say that, like I considered myself a leftist, a long time ago, but is what happened to me, going to like... more of a libertarian right, is that a product of subversion, or is it something that I through my own curiosity kind of learned and shifted towards?
It could be a bit of everything. Again, we're individualists on the right, so there's no way I can know exactly why and how it happened to you. But again, what was it? I think it was Hitchens, I think. I don't even remember who said it, that basically a right-winger is a liberal who got robbed. So essentially, it is a accumulation of facts. First of all, you probably gotten older, because, if you're not a leftist in your 20s, you probably have no heart. If you're still a leftist in your 30s, you most definitely don't have a brain. Well, I guess I don't have a heart. I've never been a leftist. But as a general rule, it's a combination of multiple factors. For instance, even during communist era days, the fact that there were people willing to risk their lives or risk whatever freedom they had under communism just to transmit samizdat books of Milton Friedman and samizdat books of Mises and so on. That this was there was a big thing in Poland, especially to a lesser extent in Hungary and in Yugoslavia. It wasn't necessary because you could actually legally import them. But still, those people are basically activists and should be considered activists and subverters. Many people got exposed to those ideas then. Was it a result of the subversion? Well, yes and no, because first, they access the material thanks to subversion, but then it also followed a thought process to get them there. So it's usually a combination of multiple things. But we cannot control people's minds, but we can help them see material that otherwise would not be seen by them.
Yeah, I think a big change is the internet. Even a few generations before me didn't have access to all this information, and I can remember like things slowly changing in me. You know, the first connection I got with this ideology, because the place here and the things here are stacked really against you as a kid, because we have government schooling, of course. We have government, even, it starts with kindergartens, it's all state owned. You have private kindergartens. You had back then, but like I would say 95% of people did not have access to those. Also to primary schools, and then middle schools, and then high schools. Mostly it's state owned, and if it's not under state control, it has to follow the curriculum that is approved by the state. So it's. I don't think that they really. Or maybe they do. Maybe I'm naive a bit, but I don't think that they do really actively try to indoctrinate you. But they really don't try to offer as many opinions as possible, especially in topics such as history, where things are pretty relative, But I can remember, having like a first contact. It was with radical feminists. I used to do here in Ljubljana. I used to do. You can hear the chopper spinning in the background. Yeah, I was always under the impression that feminism that's a good thing. We want women to have rights. We want women to be treated like men. Exactly. Like,
no, I don't.
Not exactly.
I'm
sorry.
We want that.
Sorry. Yeah, I framed it wrong. To have the opportunities, to have the basically the rights, the same rights as men do. I think a basic starting point, an equal starting point, is a good thing to strive for.
Why?
Well, I think that it's because you want people to have access to the best opportunities for their growth. To kind of fulfill the potential.
There's something missing in your narrative. Responsibilities.
Yeah, sure. Responsibility as well.
Yeah, fine. Let's draft all the women.
Yeah, I mean, if we, I agree with that. If men are carrying burdens that women are not carrying, I agree that it's not okay. Maybe I'm a bit of a traditionalist, and then I go, but yeah, women shouldn't be, fighting wars. I think men should be conscripted as well. I think we should abolish conscription, not, put women in the same position. I think we should go backwards. But I really try to stay as consistent with these things as possible. But maybe I have some ideas that are not as fleshed out as they should be. But as a general rule, I thought feminism, yeah, a good thing. But then I remember talking about rape with a few of these women, and I got shit on like I was a rape apologist, just because I advocated that yeah, of course the victim is not to blame, but as a woman you still can do things to protect yourself. To do like basic threat avoidance, and that was just too much already. And I got shit on, and I got kicked out of a group, and I was like, what the fuck is going on? And add to that then the Gamergate, and I got into this through of all things like food policy. I in high school I got into like more into like in sport and into food, and I saw how much regulation, how much things are actually being policies about nutrition, how they are affecting the population negatively, and so on and so on. And it was a slow grinding process, but it was like a step, like a red pill here, maybe there, and I saw like things changing in me. And now that that I listen to like Jordan Peterson talking about certain personality traits, I can see that it was very weird, because I am like in the middle somewhere. I'm not really radically predisposed to leftism or right wing ideologies. So it's maybe I mean of course I'm an individual, that this is my experience, but yeah, I can remember like slowly shifting and like slowly losing friends, just for speaking my opinions, just slowly losing friends. And then I knew, I think I'm onto something. And then you find like interesting people like Mr. J, having this opportunity to talk to you, watching your videos and having like access to all this information, even more than I had when in high school. So I think really it is important to, maybe I don't agree with everything you say, but I think it's so fucking interesting because I never heard these ideas framed in a way that you framed them. So
but framing is is usually 70% of the argument, which is why, I mean, if you've ever been to a debate club, any serious debater will tell you that basically framing is about 3/4 of the debate. If you manage to get to be the individual, the side of the debate that gets to do the framing, the likelihood of you losing is minuscule, even if you're incredibly stupid the rest of the process. If you got to the chance to be the one to frame the debate, then you won. That's why the left was able to win many arguments until they lost the ability to frame it. Because when they had the ability to frame it, they would frame it as, for instance, in racial politics. Yeah, white people are bad, everyone else is fantastic. Because they got the chance to be the first ones and the only ones to even attempt to frame a debate, they would lose most of they would win most of the arguments. Nowadays, when they no longer get the chance to frame, and especially when you get conservatives who are like, hold on a second, meet my friend Thomas Sowell. Now, please explain to Thomas Sowell how he's a white privileged bigot. Thomas Sowell grew up in Harlem, in the harshest area of New York, during segregation. He attended university and graduated during segregation. So yeah, please, now let's have a discussion about why affirmative action is good, and Thomas Sowell will explain to you why you need to get in the helicopter. And once you get these kinds of opportunities, and what conservatives are doing when they use Thomas Sowell, or even younger people like Candace Owens, for instance, or C.J. Pearson, what they're basically doing is reframing the debate. And once you get the chance to reframe, then and thankfully, because the left doesn't have much else. They have framing and identity politics. Once you strip that away from them, then suddenly you'll realize that the vast majority of the leftist project not only doesn't make any sense, but it is actively harmful exactly to the people it was supposed to protect. The welfare state, for instance. I mean, nobody hurts poor people more than the welfare state. There is nothing worse for poor people than eco-Marxist or ecologist or environmentalist policies. Banning old cars. Yeah, well, who drives old cars? Because the left imagines that it's highly bourgeois white men who drive old cars because they're collectors. Yeah, but those are usually 100, maybe 150 people in any country. The vast majority of the people who drive old cars are old people or poor people. Old people are also poor usually, with few exceptions. So once you ban those people's cars, you basically force them to revert back to an African style of poverty. Hans Rosling, for instance, if you remember, the Swedish statistician, had this spectacular talk in which he explained basically that if you want the key factor to get there are portions of Africa where people still live below the global poverty line. If you want to make sure that they'll get out from there, give them a bicycle. They'll climb above the global poverty line in less than 3 months. If you want to make their income triple, get them access to a car, and their income will triple in less than 6 months. So basically, when the environmentalists in Europe, they ban cars or they hyper-regulate them and thus making them more and more expensive and less accessible to the lower strata of the society, they're literally forcing the poor people back or closer to African style of poverty. So, but once you remove the framing, the identity politics, because these are the two things that the left has, once you remove that and you start using a cold analysis, most of the policies of the left are harmful to the groups that they pretend to protect. The left is all about the poor people. Yeah, nobody hurts poor people more than the left. The left is all about women. Yeah, well, how about the fact that since feminism became a thing, women are less and less happy, and they're the least happy than they've ever been before. There's no question about it that women of the current year are less happy than the women of the 50s. Even the women of the 50s in the Soviet Union were still happier than women under feminist policies today. That should tell you something. But then again, the left doesn't act rationally. They only think in terms of narratives, systems of oppression, that is identity politics, and they're accustomed to getting the chance to frame the debate. That's how the left thinks. And what I am proposing is take away the identity politics, take away their ability to frame via activism and via counter narratives, and then we get the chance to frame the narrative. And all we have to do is basically put in the common sense argument, because most people, most of the time, are inherently conservative on most topics. Sure, not all of them. We're going to lose some arguments along the way. We're not going to win. We're not going to get everything we want, but we will get a lot more than we dare to imagine right now. And of course, there are particularities. For instance, in Slovenia, there are a lot of, I believe you call them Yugo nostalgics. Yeah, that's kind of degenerate, but it is what it is. And because the things are like that, the non-leftist project will have to adapt itself somehow to the demographics that exist here. You don't have too many nostalgics, let's say, in Czech Republic. That's why the Czech Republic has a Second Amendment and Slovenia doesn't. But nevertheless, there are certain generalities that apply to almost every country, especially, countries belonging to the Judeo-Christian civilization, basically. These generalities kind of apply to all of the Judeo-Christian civilization. And that's basically what I'm proposing. Use the methods of the left and to take away their ability to frame the narrative and take away their ability to basically win the debate before they even started the debate.
Oh no. Oh no.
Yep.
Yeah, power outage.
Shit. I guess the commies have heard us.
Shut it down, boys. Oh no. Let me see if the guys are here.
Oy vey.
Oy vey, exactly.
Hey, what the fuck happened? Where's my... Light is back. I think.
Oh shit.
Closed again, up again.
Damage report,
I think we might
damage assessment.
Did we lose the entire audio file? Oh, it's down again.
What's going on? Is it us?
No, it's the
village.
It's the weather. There's a storm. There's a storm somewhere in the.
There's a storm coming.
No, yeah, probably because it's just the distribution network, so you can report that.
Well, I have it on tape while we were talking.
On tape with the shitty audio, probably. Well, if you were recording on tape, you probably have your files. Now we're not so sure if it's gonna keep it, you know. We're just gonna have to see.
I should have put my audio
How did
recorder
it
as well. I have it with me.
I think we had a good conversation.
Yeah, we had, but do we have the audio file?
We'll see. First we need the power to.
Yeah, I'm just gonna wait if it's.
It's very likely that. Looking from the clouds and so on, it's very
gonna take a
likely
while.
that this is game over.